Have you ever wondered what a full day of food looked like for an ordinary person in the Middle Ages? Not a king at a feast, not a knight at court, but a peasant. Someone who rose with the sun, lived by the land, and made do with what they had, season after season. Because behind every castle and every cathedral, there were hundreds of homes without chimneys, with smoke curling up through thatched roofs. Homes where meals were made, not with wealth, but with wisdom. And that's where we begin. Before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you're enjoying this kind of content, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I always find it fascinating to see how far we've all gathered for this one quiet moment of curiosity. Now, let's step into the day. The medieval world didn't have alarms, but you didn't need one, not when the rooster crowed or when the animals began to stir in their stalls. Light slowly filtered in through small glassless windows. There was no coffee, no breakfast bar to unwrap. Just cold air, bare feet on an earthen floor, and the warmth of yesterday's ashes, still faintly alive in the hearth. Before anything else, someone had to wake the fire. No click of a stove or twist of a dial. Just breath, patience, and a bit of dry straw. Fire was everything. It cooked your food, warmed your family, and lit the long dark hours of winter. It had to be coaxed back to life every morning, and it had to be kept alive all day. Now, onto the first meal, though calling it breakfast in the modern sense isn't quite right. There was a kind of early meal, but it was light, usually something to give a bit of energy before a morning of work. Bread was the foundation. Dense, dark bread, made from whatever grains were on hand: rye, barley, sometimes oats. Wheat was expensive and rare for most peasants. A slice of that bread, maybe dipped in a bit of broth left from the night before. If there were dairy animals, goats or a cow, they might have a bit of curds or soft cheese. Sometimes, if fortune smiled, they'd have a little ale to drink with it, not to get drunk, but because the water wasn't always safe. This early meal was modest, eaten quickly. It wasn't eaten around a table, often not even sitting down. It was something you took in your hand while checking the animals or before heading to the fields, and it changed with the seasons. In summer, maybe there were berries. In autumn, maybe an apple. But always, it was shaped by what was growing, what was stored, and what hadn't run out yet. Food was never separate from the land or the weather. A frost could change your menu for weeks. Most medieval people didn't eat alone. If you were lucky, you had family nearby, parents, siblings, children, even neighbors stopping by. Meals were shared, not scheduled. You didn't grab something on your way out. There were no snacks hidden in cupboards, no deliveries showing up at your door. If you ate it, someone had planted it, gathered it, or made it by hand. And the tools of that making: humble, a stone for grinding grain, a heavy pot for stews, a knife passed down through generations, wooden bowls and spoons, sometimes even bread used as a plate, a trencher, they called it. No one had cabinets filled with gadgets. You learned to cook by doing, by watching your elders, by feeling the food in your hands. Recipes weren't written down. They were remembered, shaped by habit and hunger, and the rhythm of the year. And all the while that little hearth fire burned. It didn't just cook your food, it gathered the family. It lit the faces of people whose names are long forgotten, but whose way of life quietly shaped ours. So that's how the day began. Not with speed, but with routine. Not with choices from a menu, but with a handful of what was available. It might sound hard to us now, but it was also deeply connected. And it set the stage for the main meal to come, a pot that simmered slowly, and a table where everyone eventually gathered. In next part, we'll step into the heart of the day, the biggest meal, the midday dinner. We'll see what went into the pot, what came out, and how every meal was a quiet act of survival and celebration. As the morning sun lifted above the misty fields, the rhythm of daily life began to unfold. Breakfast for a medieval peasant wasn't elaborate. It wasn't meant to be. It was fuel, pure and simple, built from what the land had given the day before. Often that meant pottage, a thick, earthy stew made of grains and whatever vegetables remained from yesterday's meal. There was no cereal aisle, no sugar-topped options in cardboard boxes, just a clay pot near the hearth, gently bubbling, waiting to be stirred. The ingredients were humble: barley or oats thickened with chopped leeks, bits of cabbage, perhaps a lone carrot. If the household was lucky, or if it was near a fast-moving stream, a small piece of fish might find its way in. But most days, meat was absent. Instead, the flavor came from herbs dried in bunches and tied with string, parsley, sage, maybe a clove or two of garlic. passed down from a neighbor's garden. Children ate sitting on stools, adults kneeling on rush-covered floors. A wooden bowl might be shared between two. Fingers and spoons made from horn did most of the work. No one checked their phones, of course. There were no distractions beyond the crackle of firewood and the sound of someone coughing softly across the room. Morning meals were eaten with a kind of reverence, not because they were special, but because they were needed. Everyone had work to do. After breakfast, households began dividing their chores, and just as the body needed food, the day's labor would eventually call for a midday meal. This second meal wasn't lunch as we know it, not grabbed in a hurry, not eaten alone at a desk. It was a break from work, shared when the sun was highest, often outdoors if the weather allowed, and again, it was made from what was left. Bread, coarse and dark from rye or barley, was a staple. This bread was dense and heavy, sometimes slightly sour if the dough had sat too long. It was often dipped in broth or served with ale, which was weaker than modern beer and safer than the water. Ale was made in the village by women in most cases, and drinking it wasn't about celebration, it was survival. Clean water could be a risk, but ale, boiled during brewing, offered a safer sip. Alongside the bread might be cheese, white, crumbly, tart, not aged in fancy cellars but fresh, simple, and often made at home from the family's cow or goat. Cheese was more than food. It was a preservation method, a way to stretch milk long after it was collected. That cheese might be crumbled into stew, or eaten alone, or sometimes mixed with herbs and wrapped in leaves. If it was summer or early fall, someone would have gone out gathering, berries in a woven basket, wild sorrel or nettles for soup, hazelnuts shaken from trees. What you found often determined what you ate. There was no recipe book, just instinct, passed down from those who came before. What's most striking, though, is the pace. There was no microwave, no ready-made snack. Everything took time, time to harvest, time to cook, time to wait. Food didn't appear, it became. Meals weren't about options, they were about enough warmth, enough strength to carry you to evening, enough to keep the scythe swinging, the laundry rinsed, the animals fed. And yet, despite its simplicity, midday meals in the Middle Ages had their own kind of richness. Not in luxury, but in presence. People ate together, spoke, looked each other in the eye. They may not have known what vitamins were, or tracked steps on a smartwatch, but they understood that food, shared and honest, could sustain more than the body. As shadows stretched longer across fields and paths turned gold in the late afternoon, the day edged toward its end, and so did the final meal. In the next part, we'll follow the winding path back to the hearth as dinner takes shape, what peasants prepared as the light faded, how they stretched their ingredients to the very edge, and why their simple table might be more nourishing than ours in ways we've forgotten. By the time the evening crept in, the village began to quiet. Chickens settled, children grew drowsy, and hearths across the countryside glowed like soft lanterns behind shuttered windows. Dinner in a medieval peasant household was rarely grand, but it was deliberate. It was the day's final act, and it mattered. The food, by this hour, was familiar. You might think of it as repetition, but for them, it was rhythm. The pottage that had simmered earlier might be warmed again, thickened with bread or fresh greens gathered on the walk home. A bit of lentil, if lucky, or field beans, protein not from meat, but from soil. It wasn't exotic, but it was filling, and after hours of labor, that was enough. The bread reappeared, sliced or torn by hand, maybe toasted on the edge of the fire for a bit of texture. Some households rubbed it with garlic, or soaked it in warm milk for children. The milk came not from a store, but from a goat tethered near the back door, its diet as pure as the fields allowed. For those living near rivers or coastlines, fish sometimes joined the table, smoked or salted, if preserved, or freshly caught if the day had been generous. Inland salted herring was a common guest, its sharp saltiness softened by boiled grains or root vegetables. It might not sound luxurious, but to a peasant it was deeply appreciated. Food wasn't just nourishment, it was hard-earned, and if it was a feast day, or even the eve of one, you might find something sweet, not sweet like today's candy, but sweet in its own subtle way. A baked apple spiced with herbs, or a bit of dried fruit chopped into warm porridge. Honey was a treasure, so was butter, both used sparingly, stretched lovingly, remembered long after the last bite. Dinner was eaten by firelight, no screens, no background noise. just the crack of burning wood and the closeness of family. The room was small and the air smoky, but the sense of presence was vast. Food did not compete with distraction, it ended the day the same way it had begun, simply, quietly, together. After the meal, scraps were saved, not wasted. Bones became broth for tomorrow, bread crusts were dried for later stews, cheese wrappings were tucked away. The fire banked low under ash to keep its glow through the night. The kitchen didn't shut down, it slowed, softened, waited, and there was comfort in that. Not convenience, but continuity. Knowing that tomorrow's meal was already beginning in the bones of today's, that the act of eating wasn't separate from life, it was the heartbeat of it. The modern world has plenty to offer, of course, more variety, faster meals, foods from distant lands, but it also has distance, between us and our food, between us and one another. In the medieval world, that distance was small, the chicken whose egg you cracked in the morning. You fed it with your scraps the night before, the garlic in your stew, dug from your neighbor's soil, the bread you tore in half, baked beside someone else's in the communal oven, its crust browned with shared warmth. They didn't always eat well, but they always knew what they were eating, where it came from, who touched it, what it meant. In the next part, we'll step outside the house and into the larger rhythms of the medieval village. How seasonal feasts, fasting days and church calendars shaped the menu. Why Wednesdays and Fridays often looked different on the table. And how food was woven into ritual, memory, and celebration in ways we rarely consider now. Step out into the village square on a holy day, and the atmosphere changes entirely. The church bells ring louder. The air carries a sharper scent, roasting grains, warm spices, and firewood smoke. Food, in the medieval world, didn't just fill bellies, it marked time, honored saints, and stitched people together in celebration. The church calendar shaped the year. It wasn't just about Christmas and Easter. There were dozens of feast days, some solemn, some joyful, and each with its own foods, customs, and reasons. On feast days, meat might appear even in the poorest homes, boiled bacon, a sliver of lamb, or the elusive roast goose, if the village pooled its efforts. You didn't need much, just a bite of something rare to remind you the day was special. But where there were feasts, there were also fasts. Wednesdays and Fridays were often meatless, so were entire weeks during Lent and Advent. Instead, people turned to fish, grains, and vegetables. This wasn't optional, it was spiritual, it was about humility, penance, and rhythm. Modern diets are filled with rules, but rarely meaning. For medieval peasants, food choices had a deeper frame, not just what they could eat, but when and why. The remarkable thing, these limitations bred creativity. On fasting days, villages came alive with clever substitutions. Almond milk was made by soaking crushed nuts, long before plant-based milks filled grocery aisles. Fish pies might include herbs, onions, and even raisins. People experimented not because it was trendy, but because they had to, and from that came recipes passed through generations. And then there were harvest festivals, joyous, earthy celebrations, where food was offered to both God and community. Grains freshly threshed, pies stuffed with whatever the earth had given. Music, laughter, candles, a shared meal outside under the changing sky. It was a way of saying thank you, a way of being together. Children learned the cycle of the year through taste. The first apples in autumn, the rich dark bread of winter, the early greens of spring. Every season had a flavor, and that memory stayed for life. You didn't forget the pie your mother made for Candlemas, or the warm cheese she shaped at midsummer. Food wasn't just nourishment, it was time travel. You could taste your own childhood, your parents' hands, the shape of your village. Modern eating is often lonely. Grabbing food from a drive-through window, eating in the car, swiping through a screen while you chew, calories without context. But for medieval peasants, meals were full of presence. Even in hardship, even with little, they found ways to make eating a source of connection. That's something we can still learn from. That food isn't just fuel, it's identity, it's memory, it's community. So next time you bite into something ordinary, bread, cheese, beans, pause. Imagine who might have eaten the same, hundreds of years ago, under the same moon, by the same firelight. Picture their hands, their stories, their table. You might find that history lives not in books, but in flavor. If you've enjoyed this journey through the kitchens and tables of the medieval world, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still thinks peasants only ate gruel. Your support helps me keep bringing history to life in a way that's curious, human, and real. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.